The full moon has inspired a lot of different things: artwork, science, song, television, movies, and lunacy. Science has long studied and speculated about the effect the moon has on mankind. Some believe that with its rising comes a curse. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. So said Maliva the Gypsy Woman in Universal Studios' 1941 hit monster movie The Wolfman. While that remains one of the most popular takes on the legend, the origin of werewolves goes back a lot further. In traditional folklore, a lycanthrope is more simply known as a werewolf. These wolf men and women is an otherwise ordinary person who possesses the ability to shapeshift into a wolf, either on purpose or after being bitten or scratched by someone with the same affliction or curse. These startling transformations usually happen monthly on the night of a full moon. In ancient times, there was even a scientific name for this affliction or ability. It became known as lycanthropy, which translates to wolf person. European folklore is rife with stories of the existence of werewolves. These creatures can come in many variants, which are usually all related by a then frequent development of a Christian deciphering of underlying European folklore, which became popular during the medieval period. During the early modern period, the belief in werewolves had spread to the New World with colonialism. Throughout the course of the late Middle Ages and the early modern period, these beliefs developed in tandem with the belief in witches. As a result, just like the witchcraft trials, werewolf trials emerged in what is now Switzerland during the early 15th century and spread all over Europe in the 16th century. By the 17th century, trials of werewolves reached their peak before waning in the 18th century. The punishment of werewolves and the resulting folklore is a vital component of the witch hunt phenomenon, even though by comparison it is a marginal one. Lycanthropy accusations were involved in only a small percentage of witchcraft trials. During the early days, these charges of lycanthropy were often coupled with accusations of wolf charming or wolf riding. The 1589 case of Peter Stump gave way to a massive peak in both the interest in and the persecution of people who were reported to be werewolves, especially in German-speaking and French-speaking Europe. The phenomenon lasted the longest in Austria and Bavaria, with the punishment for wolf charmers logged for a long time after the year 1650. The final lycanthropy cases took place in the early 18th century in Styria and Carinthia. Sometime after the witch trials had ended, werewolves became very popular in the emerging Gothic horror genre, as well as in folklore studies. Werewolf fiction began developing during the 18th century as a result of the semi-fictional chapbook tradition. The werewolf folklore that is found in Europe harkens back to a frequent happening during the Middle Ages, arising in the context of Christianization and the associated interpretation of pre-Christian mythology in Christian terms. Their roots can be traced back to Proto-Indo-European mythology, in which lycanthropy is regenerated as a facet of the induction into the warrior class. This has also been seen in the Tierkrieger depictions from the Germanic sphere and in Iron Age Europe and elsewhere. From the early medieval perspective, transformations of men into wolves in pagan cults were associated with the devil. The very concept of a werewolf in Northern and Western Europe is incredibly influenced by the role of the wolf in Germanic paganism, but there are similar traditions in other parts of Europe which were not entirely influenced by Germanic tradition, especially in the Balkans and in Slavic Europe, and possibly in areas bordering the Indo-European sphere, or where Indo-European cultures have been replaced by military conquest in the medieval era. There are even a few references of men changing into wolves found in ancient Greek mythology and literature. Herodotus, in his histories, wrote that the Nuru, a tribe he identifies as being located to the northeast of Scythia, were all changed into wolves once every year for several days, and then transformed back to their human forms. This tale was also told by Pomponius Mela. During the 2nd century BC, the Greek geographer Pausanias told the story of Lycaon, who was cursed and transformed into a wolf because he had ritually killed a child. In accounts by Bibliotheca and Ovid, Lycaon serves human flesh to Zeus because he wanted to know if he was really a god. Lycaon's transformation is the punishment for his crime, which was considered variously as impiety, murder and cannibalism. Ovid also tells of stories pertaining to men who stalked the woods of Arcadia while in the shape of wolves. Pausanias also tells the tale of an Arcadian man named Damocus of Parrhasia, who was transformed into a wolf after he tasted the entrails of a human child who was sacrificed to Zeus Lycaeus. After 10 years, he was restored to human form and went on to become an Olympic champion. This story has also been told by Pliny the Elder, who refers to the man as Demetus, quoting Agriopas. Pliny the Elder also told another tale of lycanthropy. Quoting Euanthes, Pliny says that each year in Arcadia, a man is chosen by lottery from the Anthus clan. The chosen man is then taken to a marsh in the area, where he hangs his clothes onto an oak tree, swims across the marsh, and is then changed into a wolf. Upon his transformation, he must join a pack for 9 years. If the man can go 9 years without tasting human flesh, he can then return to the same marsh, swim back and recover his previous human form, only 9 years older. In his poetic work, Eclogue, Virgil told of a man named Moeris, who used poisons and herbs that were picked in his native Pontus to transform himself into a wolf. In Gaius Petronius Arbiter's The Satyricon, written circa AD 60, one of the prose's characters, Nicarus, recounts a story at a banquet regarding a friend who turns into a wolf. Nicarus describes the happening as follows. "When I look for my buddy, I see he'd stripped and piled his clothes by the roadside. He pees in a circle round his clothes and then, just like that, turns into a wolf. After he turned into a wolf, he started howling and then ran off into the woods." In these works of Roman writers, werewolves are given the name Wersipellis, which translates to turn skin. Before the 14th century, there weren't any widespread beliefs of werewolves in medieval Europe. There were, however, a few examples of man-wolf transformations in the court literature of the time. Luitprand of Cremola reported on a rumour that said that Bejan, son of Simeon I of Bulgaria, could use magic to transform himself into a wolf. Marie de France's circa 1200 poem, Bisclavret, tells of a nobleman, Bizenaire, who, for reasons that were not detailed, transformed into a wolf every week. When his double-crossing wife stole his clothing that he needed to change back into his human form, he was hunted. Eventually, Bizenaire escaped the king's wolf hunt by begging the king for mercy. Once granted, he accompanied the king thereafter. The German word werewolf had been logged by Bouchard von Worms during the 11th century, and by Berthold of Regensburg during the 13th century, but is not told of in all of medieval German fiction or poetry. References to werewolves were equally as rare in England, because whatever significance the wolf men of Germanic paganism had carried, the associated beliefs and practices had been successfully repressed after Christianization. If they did persist, they did so outside the sphere of literacy that is currently available. In the year 1539, Martin Luther used the term Beowulf to describe a hypothetical ruler worse than a tyrant who must be resisted. The Germanic pagan traditions that are associated with wolf men kept going for the longest period of time during the Scandinavian Viking Age. Harald I of Norway is said to have had a body of Ulfedna, which means wolf-coated men, that is mentioned in the Haraldskavoy, the Vatnsdøla saga, and the Volsunga saga. Harald's story resembles some werewolf legends. The Ulfedna were warriors who were similar to the berserkers. They dressed in wolf hides rather than the more common bearskins, and were said to be able to channel the spirits of these animals to enhance their effectiveness while in battle. These fighters killed viciously in battle, and were said to be resistant to pain, just like wild animals. Ulfedna and berserkers are closely associated with the Norse god Odin. The Scandinavian traditions of this period are believed to have spread to Kievan Rus, thus giving rise to the Slavic werewolf tales. The 11th century Belarusian prince Veseslav of Polotsk was believed to have been a werewolf who was capable of moving at superhuman speeds, as recounted in the tale of Igor's campaign. Veseslav the prince judged men. As prince he ruled towns, but at night he prowled in the guise of a wolf. From Kiev, prowling, he reached before the cock's crew to Matorokan. The path of Great Sun, as a wolf, prowling, he crossed. For him in Polotsk, they ran for matins early at St. Sophia the Wells, but he heard the ringing in Kiev. The situation described during the medieval period gives rise to the dual form of werewolf folklore found in early modern Europe. On one hand, the Germanic werewolf, which becomes associated with the witchcraft panic from around 1400, and on the other hand, the Slavic werewolf, or Vlacolac, which becomes associated with the concept of the revenant, or vampire. The Eastern werewolf vampire is found in the folklore of Central and Eastern Europe, including Hungary, Romania and the Balkans, while the Western werewolf sorcerer is found in France, German-speaking Europe, and in the Baltic. There were a lot of werewolf attack reports, and of course werewolf court trials, happening in 16th century France. Some of the cases presented clear evidence against the accused of murder and cannibalism, but none of association with wolves. There are also other cases in which people have been terrorized by such creatures. It was common to accuse someone of being a werewolf in witch trials throughout their history. Werewolves were even featured in the Valis witch trials, which was one of the first trials altogether, during the first half of the 15th century. In addition, there were reports of child-eating werewolves in the Vord as early as the year 1448. A great deal of treatise on werewolves was written in France during the years 1595 and 1615. Werewolves were sighted in Anjou during the year 1598, and a teenage werewolf was given life imprisonment in Bordeaux back in 1603. A well-known jurist and judge of St. Claude, named Henry Boget, penned a lengthy chapter about werewolves in the year 1602. In the Vord, werewolves were sentenced and convicted in both the year 1602 as well as in the year 1624. A treatise which was penned by a Vord pastor in the year 1653, however, contended that lycanthropy was just an illusion. After this, the only further record from the Vord dates to 1670. It is that of a boy who claims he and his mother could change themselves into wolves, which was, however, not taken seriously. At the beginning of the 17th century, witchcraft was being prosecuted by James I of England, who regarded werewolves as victims of delusion induced by a natural superabundance of melancholic. After the year 1650, beliefs in lycanthropy had all but completely disappeared from French-speaking Europe. Evidence of this can be found in Diderot's Encyclopedia, which attributed reports of lycanthropy to a disorder of the brain. From then on, there were continuing reports of extraordinary wolf-like beasts, but they were not identified as werewolves. One report concerned what became known as the Beast of Gévaudan, which terrorized the area of the former province of Gévaudan, which is now known as Lozère, in south-central France, during the year 1764 until the year 1767. The Beast of Gévaudan reportedly killed upwards of 80 people, men, women and even children. The only part of Europe that showed steadfast interest in werewolves after the year 1650 was the Holy Roman Empire. There were at least 9 works on lycanthropy printed in Germany between the years 1649 and 1679. In the Bavarian and Austrian Alps, the belief in werewolves remains constant well into the 18th century. Wolf attacks on humans were sporadic until the 20th century, but still very much a widespread feature of life in Europe. Scholars have noted that wolves were the most feared predators in Europe, so it was inevitable that they became projected into the folklore of evil shapeshifters. An idea is examined in Sabine Baring-Gould's work, The Book of Werewolves, that werewolf legends could have been used to explain serial killings. The most infamous example of this is the case of Peter Stump, the German farmer and supposed serial killer and cannibal, who was also known as the Werewolf of Bedburg. Stump was executed in the year 1589 for his crimes. Common Turkic folklore maintains a different, respectful light on the werewolf legends. Turkic Central Asian shamans, after performing long and arduous rites, would voluntarily be able to transform into the humanoid Kurtadam, which quite literally means wolfman. The wolf was a totemic ancestor animal of the Turkic peoples, so any shaman who could change into such a form was regularly revered. Modern researchers have tried to explain previous reports of werewolf-like behaviour in known medical conditions. In 1963, Dr. Lee Ellis of Guy's Hospital in London penned a paper called On Porphyria and the Etiology of Werewolves. Ellis contends that many historical accounts of werewolves could in fact have been referring to victims of congenital porphyria. The symptoms of congenital porphyria include reddish teeth, photosensitivity and psychosis. All of those things could have been grounds for accusing a person who was suffering from this condition of being a werewolf. This explanation has been contested by many because mythological werewolves were almost always portrayed as resembling true wolves, and that their human forms were rarely physically seen displaying the symptoms of porphyria. Other scholars and professionals have pointed out there's a possibility that historical werewolves could have been sufferers from a condition known as hypertrichosis. Hypertrichosis is a hereditary condition that causes excessive hair growth. However, this possibility has also been disputed as the rarity of the disease has ruled it out from happening on a scale as large as the werewolf cases that were being reported in medieval Europe. People suffering from Down syndrome have also been suggested by some scholars to have been possible originators of werewolf myths. Even rabies has been suggested as the origin of werewolf beliefs, claiming remarkable similarities between the symptoms of that disease and some of the legends. Many remain focused on the idea that being bitten by a werewolf could result in the victim turning into one. This suggests the idea of a transmittable disease like rabies. Even so, the idea that lycanthropy could be transmitted in this way is not part of the original myths and legends, and only appears in relatively recent beliefs. The beliefs which are classed together under the term lycanthropy are far from uniform, and the term is often capriciously applied. The change into a wolf may either be temporary or permanent. The were-animal may be the man himself who has been metamorphosized, or it may be his double whose activity leaves the real man to all appearance unchanged. It may be his soul, which goes forth seeking whomever it may devour, leaving its body in a state of trance. Or it may be little more than the messenger of the human being, a real animal or a familiar spirit, whose intimate connection with its owner is shown by the fact that any injury to it is believed, by a phenomenon known as repercussion, to cause a corresponding injury to the human being. In European folklore, werewolves were said to have telltale physical traits, while even in their human form. These traits included having curved fingernails, joined eyebrows at the bridge of the nose, low-set ears, and a swinging stride. One method that was used to identify a werewolf in its human form was to cut a slit into the flesh of the accused, under the suspicion that fur would be found within the open wound. Russian suspicion dictates that a werewolf can be recognized by bristles under the tongue. The appearance of a werewolf in its animal form changes from culture to culture as well. A fully transformed werewolf are frequently portrayed as being undistinguishable from ordinary wolves, except for the fact that it has no tail. This was also a trait that was thought to be characteristic of witches who were in animal form. According to several Swedish accounts, the werewolf could be differentiated from a regular wolf by the fact that it would run on 3 legs, stretching the 4th one backwards to look like a tail. How sneaky! Once they have gone back to their human forms, werewolves are documented as becoming debilitated, weak, and undergoing painful nervous depression. One known trait in medieval Europe was the werewolf's habit of devouring recently buried corpses. This ghoulish habit has been documented extensively, particularly in the Annales Medico-Psychologices in the 19th century. Fennoscandian werewolves were said to be old women who possessed poison-coated claws, who also had the ability to paralyze children and cattle with just their gaze. Over the years, there have been various methods reported on in terms of how a person can become a werewolf. The simplest method is simply stripping naked and putting on a belt made of wolfskin. Similar methods find people wearing the animal skin in its entirety. Some cases find the person who wants to become a wolf rubbing their bodies with a magic salve. Drinking rainwater out of the footprint of an animal or from certain enchanted streams were also considered effective methods of accomplishing a wolf transformation. A 16th century Swedish writer by the name of Olaus Magnus wrote that Liverian werewolves were initiated by draining a cup of specially prepared beer and repeating a set formula. In Germany, France and Italy, it was said that a man or woman could turn into a werewolf if he or she, on a certain Wednesday or Friday, were to sleep outside on a summer night with the full moon shining directly on his or her face. Satanic allegiance for the most loathsome ends has also been attributing to triggering werewolf transformations, but these were usually performed for the sake of satisfying a craving for human flesh. The curse of lycanthropy is also widely considered by scholars as being a form of divine punishment. Werewolf literature yields many examples of God or saints that have allegedly cursed those who garnered their wrath with lycanthropy. People who have been excommunicated by the Roman Catholic Church are also said to become werewolves. The power of transforming others into wild beasts was attributed not only to malignant sorcerers, but to Christian saints as well. Omnes angelae, bone et male, ex virtute naturali habunt potestatem transmutandi corpora nostra, which translates to, all angels, good and bad, have the power of transmutating our bodies, was the dictum of St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Patrick was said to have transformed the Welsh king Leviticus into a wolf. Natalis supposedly cursed an illustrious Irish family whose members were each doomed to be a wolf for 7 years. In other tales, the divine agency is even more direct, while in Russia, again, men supposedly became werewolves when incurring the wrath of the devil. A notable exception to the association of lycanthropy and the devil comes from a rare and lesser-known account of an 80-year-old man named Thias. In 1692, in Jurgensburg, Livonia, Thias testified under oath that he and other werewolves were the hounds of God. He claimed they were warriors who went down into hell to do battle with witches and demons. Their efforts ensured that the devil and his minions did not carry off the grain from local failed crops down to hell. Thias was steadfast in his assertions, claiming that werewolves in Germany and Russia also did battle with the devil's minions in their own versions of hell, and insisted that when werewolves died, their souls were welcomed into heaven as reward for their service. Thias was ultimately sentenced to 10 lashes for idolatry and superstitious belief. Various methods have existed for removing the werewolf form. In antiquity, the ancient Greeks and Romans believed in the power of exhaustion in curing people of lycanthropy. The victim would be subjected to long periods of physical activity in the hope of being purged of the malady. This practice stemmed from the fact that many alleged werewolves would be left feeling weak and debilitated after committing depredations. In medieval Europe, traditionally there are 3 methods one can use to cure a victim of lycanthropy. Medicinally, usually via the use of wolfsbane, surgically, or by exorcism. However, many of the cures advocated by medieval medical practitioners proved fatal to the patients. A Sicilian belief of Arabic origin holds that a werewolf can be cured of its ailments by striking it on the forehead or scalp with a knife. Another belief from the same culture involves the piercing of the werewolf's hands with nails. Sometimes less extreme methods were used. In the German lowland of Schleswig-Holstein, a werewolf could be cured if one were to simply address it 3 times by its Christian name, while one Danish belief holds that merely scolding a werewolf will cure it. Conversion to Christianity is also a common method of removing lycanthropy in the medieval period. A devotion to St. Hubert has also been cited as both cure for and protection from lycanthropes. Before the end of the 19th century, the Greeks believed that the corpses of werewolves, if not destroyed, would return to life in the form of wolves or hyenas which prowled battlefields, drinking the blood of dying soldiers. In the same vein, in some rural areas of Germany, Poland and northern France, it was once believed that people who died in mortal sin came back to life as blood-drinking wolves. These undead werewolves would return to their human corpse form at daylight. They were dealt with by decapitation with a spade and exorcism by the parish priest. The head would then be thrown into a stream, where the weight of its sins was thought to weigh it down. Sometimes the same methods used to dispose of ordinary vampires would be used. The vampire was also linked to the werewolf in Eastern European countries, particularly Bulgaria, Serbia and Slovenia. In Serbia, the werewolf and vampire are known collectively as volkodlak. In Hungarian folklore, the werewolves used to live specifically in the region of Transdanubia, and it was thought the ability to change into a wolf was obtained in the infant age, after suffering abuse by the parents or by a curse. At the age of 7, the boy or girl leaves the house, goes hunting by night, and can change into a person or wolf whenever he wants. The curse can also be obtained when in adulthood the person passed 3 times through an arch made of a birch with the help of a wild rose's spine. The werewolves were known to exterminate all kinds of farm animals, especially sheep. The transformation usually occurred during the winter solstice, Easter and a full moon. Later in the 17th and 18th century, the trials in Hungary not only were conducted against witches, but against werewolves too, and many records exist creating connections between both kinds. Also, the vampires and werewolves are closely related in Hungary, being both feared in the antiquity. Among the South Slavs, and also among the Kashubians of what is now northern Poland, there was a belief that if a child was born with hair, a birthmark or a caul on their head, they were supposed to possess shape-shifting abilities. Though capable of turning into any animal they wished, it was commonly believed that such people preferred to turn into a wolf. Serbian vokodlaks traditionally had the habit of congregating annually in the winter months, when they would strip off their wolf skins and hang them from trees. They would then get a hold of another vokodlak skin and burn it, releasing from it its curse, the vokodlak from whom the skin came. According to Armenian law, there are women who, in consequence of deadly sins, are condemned to spend 7 years in wolf form. In a typical account, a condemned woman is visited by a wolf skin-toting spirit who orders her to wear the skin, which causes her to acquire frightful cravings for human flesh soon after. With her better nature overcome, the she-wolf devours each of her own children, then her relatives' children in order of relationship, and finally the children of strangers. She wanders only at night, with doors and locks springing open at her approach. When morning arrives, she reverts to human form and removes her wolfskin. The transformation is generally said to be involuntary, but there are alternative versions involving voluntary metamorphosis, where the women can transform at will. The Naskapis believe that the caribou afterlife is guarded by giant wolves, which kill careless hunters venturing too near. The Navajo people feared witches in wolf's clothing, called mycob. Woodward thought that these beliefs were due to the Norse colonization of the Americas. When the European colonization of the Americas occurred, the pioneers brought their own werewolf folklore with them, and were later influenced by the lore of their neighbouring colonies and those of the natives. Belief in the loup-garou, present in Canada, the upper and lower peninsulas of Michigan and upstate New York, originates from French folklore influenced by Native American stories on the Wendigo. In Mexico, there is a belief in a creature called the Nahul, which traditionally limits itself to stealing cheese and raping women rather than murder. In Haiti, there is a superstition that werewolf spirits, known locally as Jet Rouge, which translates to red eyes, can possess the bodies of unwitting persons and nightly transform them into cannibalistic lupine creatures. The Haitian Jet Rouges typically try to trick mothers into giving away their children voluntarily by waking them at night and asking their permission to take their children, to which the disorientated mother may either reply yes or no. The Haitian Jet Rouges differ from traditional European werewolves by their habit of actively trying to spread their lycanthropic condition to others, much like vampires. Most modern fiction describes werewolves as vulnerable to silver weapons and highly resistant to other injuries. This feature appears in German folklore of the 19th century. The claim that the beast of Gévaudan, an 18th century wolf or wolf-like creature, was shot by a silver bullet, appears to have been introduced by novelists retelling the story from 1935 onwards, and not in earlier versions. English folklore prior to 1865 showed shapeshifters to be vulnerable to silver, till the publican shot a silver button over their heads when they were instantly transformed into two ill-favoured old ladies. Circa 1640, the city of Greifswald, Germany, was infested by werewolves. A clever lad suggested that they gather all their silver buttons, goblets, belt buckles, and so forth, and melt them down into bullets for their muskets and pistols. This time they slaughtered the creatures and rid Greifswald of the lycanthropes. The 1897 novel Dracula and the short story Dracula's Guest, both written by Bram Stoker, draw on earlier mythologies of werewolves and similar legendary demons, and was to voice the anxieties of an age and the fears of late Victorian patriarchy. In Dracula's Guest, a band of military horsemen come to the aid of the protagonist, chase off Dracula, depicted as a great wolf, stating the only way to kill it is by a sacred bullet. This is also mentioned in the main novel Dracula as well. Count Dracula stated in the novel that legends of werewolves originated from his Szekely racial bloodline, and he himself is also depicted with the ability to shapeshift into a wolf at will during the night, but is unable to do so during the day, except at noon. The first feature film to use an anthropomorphic werewolf was Werewolf of London in 1935. The main werewolf of this film is a dapper London scientist who retains some of his style and most of his human features after his transformation, as lead actor Henry Hull was unwilling to spend long hours being made up by makeup artist Jack Pierce. Universal Studios drew on a Balkan tale of a plant associated with lycanthropy, as there was no literary work to draw upon, unlike the case with vampires. There is no reference to silver nor other aspects of werewolf lore such as cannibalism. A more tragic character is Lawrence Talbot, played by Lon Chaney Jr. in 1941's The Wolf Man. With Pierce's makeup more elaborate this time, the movie catapulted the werewolf into public consciousness. Sympathetic portrayals are few, but notable, such as the comedic but tortured protagonist David Naunton in An American Werewolf in London, and a less anguished and more confident and charismatic Jack Nicholson in the 1994 film Wolf. Over time, the depiction of werewolves has gone from fully malevolent to even heroic creatures, such as in the Underworld and Twilight series, as well as Blood Lad, Dance in the Vampire Bund, Rosario plus Vampire, and various other movies, anime, manga, and comic books. Other werewolves are decidedly more willful and malevolent, such as those in the novel The Howling, and its subsequent sequels and film adaptations. The form a werewolf assumes was generally anthropomorphic in early films such as The Wolfman and Werewolf of London, but a larger and powerful wolf in many later films. Werewolves were often depicted as immune to damage caused by ordinary weapons, being vulnerable only to silver objects such as a silver-tipped cane, bullet or blade. This attribute was first adopted cinematically in The Wolfman. This negative reaction to silver is sometimes so strong that the mere touch of the metal on a werewolf's skin will cause burns. Current-day werewolf fiction almost exclusively involves lycanthropy being either a hereditary condition or being transmitted like an infectious disease by the bite of another werewolf. In some fiction, the power of the werewolf extends to human form, such as invulnerability to conventional injury due to their healing factor, superhuman speed and strength, and falling on their feet from high falls. Also aggressiveness and